In the name of our Creator, Redeemer, and Sanctifier, Amen. Have a seat. For our struggle is not against enemies of blood and flesh, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers of this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in high places. When I was halfway through 7th grade, a new student started at my school. His name was Curtis. He was in my art class. My upstate New York hometown of 5,000 people was about 97% white, and Curtis was black. 3 whole days went by before another student in our art class whispered the N-word at Curtis in passing. Curtis did not hesitate, very respectably laid the kid flat with one good punch and left him squealing on the ground. I never saw Curtis again after that. He was expelled. The other kid was placed on in-school suspension for about a week. 5 years later, when I was a senior, I sat through a semester of economics in a classroom with a full-size Confederate flag hung on the back wall for historic value, my teacher said. During civics class that same year, I listened to my peers debate for class credit in favor of racial segregation. I couldn't wait to leave town when I was 18. I believed back then that I could move to some big city, some urban haven where racism had pretty much been abolished. And then I arrived in New York City a little while before Tim Stansbury's murder and stayed until a little while after Sean Bell's murder. Both of them were unarmed black civilians killed by NYPD officers. At some point during the time between their deaths, I began to realize there was no opting out. That didn't matter if I was in a red county or a blue county, a big city or out in the sticks. That if I wanted to be someplace where racism didn't exist, I had to work with others under the leadership of black and brown people to bring that place into existence. Because it doesn't exist yet. Not in New York City, not in Seattle either. So I work in Seattle half the week and Grays Harbor County the other half of the week. So I hear everybody's funny and not funny ideas. And out on the harbor, people's cards are pretty much on the table. The militias, smattering of Confederate flags on the tenement windows and felony flats. You can figure out where folks stand relatively quickly. In Seattle, I get a lot of people patting me on the back for going out there to organize in enemy territory. Aberdeen, rednecks, trailer trash. These are some of liberal Seattle's favorite code words for poor white people. And there's a familiar smug look I get from some folks when they find an opportunity to trash talk my people on the harbor, bemoaning the backwards politics. There's this underlying sentiment, if only they knew better out there, if only they voted better, they could be just like Seattle. Seattle, where we obviously have none of these problems, of racism, poverty, skyrocketing homelessness, epidemic levels of addiction. Right. If liberal self-congratulation achieved anything, Seattle would have abolished the sins of poverty and racism long ago. But instead, our rates of forced displacement continue to mushroom, while gentrification eviscerates poor and working neighborhoods of color. When I'm here half the week, I work with homeless Seattleites, many of whom once had homes in historic Black and brown neighborhoods like the Central District or Columbia City. They can tell you a great deal about the limitations of the grand progressive dream of our city as welcoming, tolerant, and open-minded. Christchurch had a small contingent at Seattle's Black Lives Matter Memorial March for Michael Brown of Ferguson, Missouri 2 weeks ago. And as we wound our way through the Central District, the young Black women who were leading the way stopped us in front of Uncle Ike's Pot Shop, 23rd and Union. They explained how Washington's marijuana legalization process had paved the way for this truly hip and glittering beacon of gentrification to open its doors right next to a Black church with a preschool, while the poor Black teenagers previously arrested for selling weed on that very same corner remain behind bars today. Our struggle is not against enemies of blood and flesh, but against the rulers, against the authorities. The stories we tell ourselves that some places have it all figured out, while other places are hopelessly screwed up, are challenged by the word we hear in Ephesians today. Blood and flesh are under the thumb of repression from Aberdeen to Seattle. Smugness has not saved us. Political parties have not saved us. Elected officials have not saved us from this present moment, not from the multiple crises that have been welling up from day one in the bloody birth of this country, and then again in the Civil War, only to be swept under the rug again by the desecrating failure of Reconstruction. And as absolutely necessary and powerful as they were, every major U.S. social movement since that time has mainly won concessions from the power structure, never fundamental transformation of it. And so here we are, in this moment, engaged again in a pitched battle for the soul of our country, with no room for spectators or sidelines. Our choices are to either forfeit to the powers and principalities grinding down poor people and people of color in the prisons, in underfunded schools, in the daily desperation-born violence of street life, or to step up as one another's belt of truth, breastplate of righteousness, and helmet of salvation. Saints have done this in the past, and we can learn from them in the present. I think of the friendship that blossomed between the biblical fundamentalist John Brown and the mystic militant Harriet Tubman as they labored together in the abolitionist movement. Brown always referred to Tubman as the general. And Tubman said, after Brown was hung for treason for the raid on Harper's Ferry, he done more in dying than 100 men would in living. But there's a piece to their friendship that comes earlier Actually came 21 years before they ever met, at the memorial service for the murdered abolitionist Elijah Lovejoy in 1837. John Brown stood, raised his right hand, and said, "Here before God, in the presence of these witnesses, I consecrate my life to the destruction of slavery." Before he ever knew her, Brown had consecrated his flesh and blood to the same struggle Tubman was waging. She ran at night through the swamps in gospel shoes. He wielded the sword of the Spirit. And together, with a host of other saints from the ranks of the poor and the enslaved, they took on the spiritual forces of wickedness in high places, and they toppled the institution of slavery. They did not reform it. They did not make a kinder, gentler slavery. They broke the institution. They outlawed it. They showed us this is possible. So we, here in 2015, have some other abolitions to secure. Poverty and racism endure, protected and perpetuated by law, by culture, by economics, by theology, just as slavery once was. But in the work of tearing down this wall, we stand on some of the biggest shoulders history has to offer. And we also stand side by side with saints, from Felony Flats in Aberdeen to Seattle's South End. We can consecrate our lives to one another anew in this generation, blood and flesh. And we can choose now and choose again and again to offer up the broken body of our country to be resurrected and redeemed.